Good afternoon, and welcome to GAMA's 2015 State of the Industry Briefing. I'm Mary Lynn Rinkowitz, Director of Communications for GAMA, and we are so pleased that you are here with us today. GAMA President and CEO Pete Bunce and GAMA's Chairman Joe Brown, President of Hartselle Propeller, will be delivering the 2014 year-end shipment and billing numbers. They will also discuss GAMA's policy initiatives in 2015, unveil the results of the new economic impact study for the U.S. economy conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and talk a little bit about some of General Aviation's contributions to the community. I do want to recognize some of the other General Aviation Association leaders who are here with us today. Mark Baker of AOPA, Ed Bolin of NBAA, Paula Dirks of AEA, Tom Hendricks of NATA, Greg Principato of NASEO, and Matt Zaccaro of HAI. Thanks for being here. There will be time for questions and answers after the presentation, and afterward there will be a lunch upstairs. We hope that you will join us for that as well. But right now we'll begin, so I will ask Pete and Joe to come up on the stage. Gentlemen.
Well, thank you, Mary Lynn, and thanks to all my buddies for being here, and you as well, Paula. And it's always wonderful to get our industry together, and this is kind of the kickoff event for the year, and it's just, let's have some fun today. And we're going to have fun talking about numbers. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about the economic contributions that this incredible industry produces in this economy here in the U.S., but also how that permeates out into a global structure. So the way we've structured it today, I'm going to start off with the numbers, and then my chairman, Joe, is going to go over some specifics about the policy initiatives that we have in work globally and here in the U.S., and then I'm going to move into talking about that economic impact study. So we hope that we inspire some questions out of you all, and I think this brief will do that. So let's start with the numbers. We're going to jump in and go with fixed wing first, and we'll start with pistons. In 2014, if you look, we were up 9.6% in aggregate for the industry and delivered 1,129 units. If you look at billings, again, up very healthy with 11.2% at $0.64 billion. Okay? And if you look at market distribution, you can see as the U.S. economy recovers, it should be no surprise that we have a greater contribution out of North America. And you can see the proportions, how they ebb and flow throughout the other regions of the planet. Now let's switch to turboprops. In the turboprop sector, we have to keep in mind that we're coming off of a very good year in turboprops in 2013. So 2014, we had, it's fairly flat, down just a little bit, 6.5%. As I've been talking about this industry, we had a very nice year in ag for both air tractor and thrush in 2013, and we hope that those sales will pick up. That's one of the reasons why Ex-Im Bank is very important to those two manufacturers. In addition, we had another manufacturer that was in a total retooling and moving a factory from one location to another in Europe. So the results within the turboprop sector, as well as whether we're talking within the sector itself or the various sectors, they are somewhat mixed between each one of the individual manufacturers. So if you look at this market distribution, again, it now has done some rebalancing there, and so the proportion in North America is back to closer to the 50% proportion that we'd seen historically. Okay, now to jets. If we look at jets, one thing that we've done in the last few years, because there's always been questions about, okay, but how are the jets doing within the segments within jets? So we'll look at that in a second, but in aggregate, we're up 6.5%, delivering 722 units. And this is the distribution between light, mid, and large. So you're seeing on the large cabin long range, fairly flat there, but you are seeing an increase in the lights to mids. Is it any surprise with the U.S. economy recovering, where that in North America we have the most robust infrastructure for lights and mids? Yeah, we would expect that to follow the fortunes of the U.S. economy, because that's where we have those 5,000 plus airfields that we have access to that we want to preserve. Next slide. If we look at billings, up 4.5% to a little over $22 billion in billings, so very healthy there. And our market distribution, if you look at that, in jets, stays relatively stable as far as North America is concerned, and then some ebbs and flows there. It is significant to note on the jet market that there were a lot of deliveries that were made to both former Eastern European countries and to Russia. That and the political perturbations and the political problems that we have in Russia right now could be a sign of some rebalancing there as we look forward. But a lot of questions that I got leading up to this was, you know, where did that increase in Europe come from? And that's actually was one of the drivers that we did deliver a lot of product over there. Next slide. Now, as we look at helicopters, one thing to note here is that in previous years, as you all know, we started tracking helicopters a few years ago, and we have been on a very nice pace to be able to aggregate the fortunes of this very important part of our industry. And this year in our report, we're capturing virtually all of the rotorcraft manufacturers with the exception of one. So we've got everyone captured here, but we are not able to go back quite as far as we can on the fixed wing side of the house. We're still aggregating those numbers, but as we become more mature in being able to report on the rotorcraft side, we'll be able to capture more historical data there. So if you look on the shipment side, Piston helicopters down fairly significantly. Again, there is, as we look at this marketplace, we had a pretty good year for Pistons in 13, but there's also a shift. It's a noticeable shift more to turbines. And so if you look at if you could just go back one, I'm sorry, Kate, just run back and you look at that billings down not quite as much as the deliveries would be, down about 11.8%. Okay, now if we switch to turbine rotorcraft, and look at that distribution, down about 22% with 741 units delivered, down about 7.9%. Now, a lot of people have asked me, okay, what's happening in the rotorcraft world? Another thing that we find in all of our product deliveries is when we have new aircraft that are on the horizon, that are in the development process, we do see somewhat of a dip that's happening as people are waiting for new production to come out there. So I think that is another factor other than coming off of a very good year in 13, but also I think we're seeing some impact in 14 on the political effects of the BRIC countries, but especially in Russia, as impacting some of the deliveries there, because there's not that long time to delivery that we have in some of the business jet on that side of the house. So with that, I'd like to switch to my chairman to talk some policy issues.
Thanks, Pete. I appreciate it. Joe Brown from Hartzell Propeller. I recognize that I'm following past chairmen from companies as large as Boeing and Jeppesen and GE. And I run a little company in Ohio with about 300 people. And it goes to show you that our industry is very, very diverse, with technology and services coming from all kinds of different manufacturers and providers. And GAMA's job is to serve all of us with smart policy. And they do a superb job. And the reason why they do that so well is because they keep it simple. We know that our policy priorities are really driven by aiding the innovation of our products and getting those products to market, by making sure the policy supports those products for a long service life, and by recognizing that our industry is ever more global and therefore ever more complex. So with that context, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our global priorities. Specifically, GAMA, particularly because they opened an office in Brussels, is really working on elevating GA safety levels worldwide and making sure that our engagement with the EASA and the Euro Commission is about innovation and product improvement. Also, we're working on improving governmental effectiveness and efficiency, and we're working on strengthening access to markets. So a little drill down into those. In terms of raising GA safety levels worldwide, we believe that if we innovate, every generation of design brings safety enhancements to the flying fleet and the operators. And so we want to get our products to market. We want that innovation to be carried to market. So specifically, GAMA's working on CS Part 23, joint effort between EASA and FAA to lead a light aircraft certification reform that essentially lowers the burden on getting light aircraft certs done, and to have two gold standard airworthiness authorities working together in partnership is an excellent outcome. It's going to enhance safety. The other big principle of working with EASA in Europe is proportional regulation. You know, you have large aircraft, complex missions, lots of equipment on board. You have small aircraft. They should not be treated the same. We should not settle for a highest common denominator approach to certification. And so GAMA is working with EASA to try to set regulatory levels at the right level for the kind of aircraft and equipment that's going to market. In terms of engagement and improving governmental effectiveness and efficiency, GAMA's done a lot of outreach. In September, GAMA hosted high-level speakers from the European Commission and from EASA in Brussels. The head of EASA's General Aviation Division pledged the agency's support to remove unnecessary regulatory burdens. It was a serious commitment on their part. And then in October, EASA dedicated its annual safety conference to improving the regulation of GA to speed, innovation, and safety advancements. And we're delighted, actually, this afternoon that EASA's Executive Director, Patrick Key, will be addressing our board, and we have opportunities to have Q&A with him. But again, it goes to show the level of engagement we have there. Now, beyond Europe, strengthening access in markets for GA has to do, in my mind, largely with this idea of validations and having our products move freely between countries. And I can tell you that GAMA is now addressing this with ever more vigor. A little company like mine, in the last 2 years, has obtained 300 validations for our type certificates and supplemental type certificates. 300, because we have to go where the market is. And that process of getting all these airworthiness agencies to validate my products so an airplane can get sold is getting more and more complex. And GAMA's doing a super job tackling that. So I'm going to move on now to U.S. initiatives. This is a largely U.S. audience, so I have some policy matters that we'll drill into a little bit, and they include the Export-Import Bank, certification reform, consistency of regulatory interpretation, the Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative, known as PAFI, and ADSB equipage, which I think is a subject matter that's pretty rich and timely. Let's start with the Export-Import Bank. There are many GAMA members who benefit from XM financing either directly or indirectly because they're in the supply chain to that equipment. And XM faced uncertain times last year with respect to its reauthorization. It got an extension. But that uncertainty was bad for general aviation. And it was bad for our company. And the camps that have talked about XM typically have been in one of three categories: end, mend, or extend. And it's clearly GAMA's position that we should extend. And if there's any practical reforms that will make the bank more effective, we would support that as well. Last May, I had the opportunity to host Speaker John Boehner at our factory in Piqua because our factory's in his district, and he wanted to see how things were going. And the #1 agenda item on my list to discuss with him was XM reauthorization. At the time that he was in our plant, one of my customers had as much as 40% of their sales facilitated by XM financing, 40%. Another one of my customers had 7 aircraft on the line about the time that the speaker was in our factory. 6 of those aircraft were being financed with XM facilities. And what we said to him was, they called us, both these customers called us and said, you need to be cautious about your forecasts, you should be cautious about your hiring, you should be cautious about your capital investment, because we don't know where this XM financing is going, and if we don't get this financing, our sales are going to drop. So this is our customers calling us, but that really put it on my radar. And Speaker Boehner was very helpful and very supportive and encouraged us to keep taking this message to the Hill, which we've done. Let me give you some quick facts. You know, for general aviation, $1.9 billion in financing has flowed to our products as they're sold into the world, $1.9 billion. And that's great because it clearly has enhanced sales, which enhances employment and all the things that are virtuous in manufacturing. But more importantly, our products can compete on their own merits when we have XM financing setting a level playing field. There are 60 credit agencies worldwide trying to promote their country's exports. And so if the United States does not provide the same facility to U.S. manufacturers, our products are no longer competing simply on their merits. They're competing on a combination of merit and financing. So we think it's really important. Moreover, in this climate of constrained government and tight spending, XM delivers a value to the taxpayer. I know there's some differences of opinion on this, but the bottom line is it returns. So it's producing jobs, it's helping innovation, it's setting a level playing field, and it's helpful to the budget. Well, we're facing that uncertainty again. In June, XM as we know it is a go, no-go. And as I said, Gamma is strongly in the extend category. And if any practical reforms would help it do its job better, we'd be interested in that. Fortunately, today we're going to hear from the chairman of the bank in our board meeting, and we will be talking with him about how we can help get the message out to Congress to get this important piece of financing extended. Certification reform. It's been a big issue in Gamma for the last several years. When the speaker was in Piqua, we spent quite a bit of time on certification reform as a matter for Congress because the FAA reauthorization is coming up this year. And he said, just keep getting your message out. It's getting heard, and make sure that you are getting the access you need to tell the story. Well, Congress has been very, very helpful, helping us to frame the issues so that we can build good language into the FAA reauthorization language. In May, Gamma members were invited to a listening session with Chairmans Schuster and Lobiondo, and those members ranged from very large companies to very small companies, but we had key issues in common. And so Congress took those in to a series of internal deliberations and then held a hearing, which I was fortunate enough to be able to testify at this summer, where I got to outline, at least for a company like mine, what certification reforms might look like. It was fun, I have to admit, and it created a dialogue with the FAA that's been continuing, and successfully so. Let me tell you a little bit about what reform might look like. We're focusing on the full utilization of ODA, Organization Designation Authorization, which is setting some companies' certification into a self-reliant and audited system. And they have authority to do things, and therefore they can do it efficiently. Well, this is not a new idea. Its origins are decades old, going back to various delegation schemes that existed before ODA. And ODA itself is 7, 8 years old. But between the FAA and industry, we have not perfected the full deployment of the delegation. So that's a big opportunity for efficiency. The other thing is that if there's a dispute about what should be delegated or retained, it's difficult to figure out who's right, and it's very difficult to turn that answer back into standard practices for the next project. There's a question around measuring good governance. We have this program called ODA, and we all say it should work better, but we can't use metrics very successfully to tell us what the issues and opportunities are, because frankly there haven't been very good metrics. So we think that would be a huge factor in driving the conversation. And finally, because FAA is a gold standard, and because they are so expert in certification, we think that they could be a major leader in helping this global validation process operate more smoothly. I can get an FAA validation, I can get an FAA TC faster than I can get a validation from a bilateral country. And all they're doing is saying the FAA was right. So we've discussed all this stuff with the FAA, and I have to say, just this morning, we had, I think, one of the most positive and productive meetings that we've had with FAA. They are totally bought into the notion of ODA deployment. They are totally bought into the idea of metrics to show where it's working and where it needs to be improved. And they are totally bought into a training program for their employees that will make the utilization of better and more efficient certification tools more likely. And I have to tell you, I go into this quarter of business with very high hopes for certification reform and efficiency. There's another matter in FAA regulation that we've been addressing, and it has to do more with the MRO side of regulation. A lot of our Gamma member companies make their living doing maintenance, repair, and overhaul or services. And if you've done any of that work, you understand you're dealing with an enormous amount of guidance, whether they be service letters, service advisories, various FAA documents. And you will do that work under the authority of various FSDOs. FSDO to FSDO, inspector to inspector, project to project. There's so much room for inconsistent interpretation of what the FAA records are actually telling us to do. Aaron Hickelman, who is our vice chairman and also the CEO of Duncan Aviation, had a chance to testify also before a congressional committee to lay out the problem and to recommend some solutions. Back in 2012, a piece of legislation actually made, or a rulemaking committee actually made 2 recommendations which Aaron wholeheartedly supported in his testimony. The first one is to provide FAA inspectors and businesses with a more complete set of information about how maintenance services should be performed. I'm going to tell you more about that in 1 second. The second one is to find a way to resolve differences or disputes over the interpretation of this regulation. So I learned this in preparation for this meeting. The FAA has something like 21 databases of critical information for continuing airworthiness. And in the vernacular of the modern age, you cannot just Google a subject and see all the references. You can't Google RVSM and have all the documents that support RVSM installations in the field show up for searchability. So that means that one person can pull one document for reference to support a project, and another inspector might pull another document that has a different outlook and a different guidance, and the MRO shop's trying to figure out who's right. So this relational database would be enormously powerful. It literally would allow the MRO provider and the FAA to be on the same page. And without it, they may not ever be on the same page. Then the second piece is resolving differences of interpretation, and the means to do that would be a regulatory consistency communications board, so that as issues are resolved into some standard interpretation, it can be flowed back into guidance in the future. So Aaron did a super job on this. It's really, really important, and the work will pay dividends over very long product life cycles. Talk a little bit about PAFI, Piston Aviation Fuels Initiative. I'm excited about this because I happen to be involved in the light end of aviation, and this has been a going effort. Bottom line is we're trying to transition away from 100 low lead to unleaded fuel. And that's an enormous fleet of aircraft, both new and old, that all have to somehow be operable with an alternative fuel. The PAFI program is on schedule. This is a big accomplishment for something that's complicated with so many stakeholders in Congress, and the President and the FAA have done a super job managing this process. In 2014, very substantial progress. 10 fuels, candidate fuels, were submitted for initial assessment. And out of those 10, 4 fuels were down selected as the most attractive candidates, both for their various properties, their distribution implications, and so on. And those fuels are going into lab and rig testing. And then amongst that set, the ones that perform best in lab and rig testing will move on to flight and engine testing and very large scale testing. Now the FAA still has the goal of having a fuel or more than one fuel fully qualified by 2018 with all of the data to substantiate a fleet-wide authorization for use. On one day, we're using 100 low lead, and then on the next day, we can use a substitute fuel. Fleet-wide, that's the goal. We're making tremendous progress there. Congress, the President, the FAA continue to show great leadership there, and I'll point out that even in the President's most recent budget for 2016, there's a $6 million placeholder to continue to drive this program. So this is great news for the light end of general aviation. Talk a little bit about ADS, ADS-B. From a policy standpoint, there's a mandate to equip all aircraft with ADS-B compliant hardware by 2020. It's Gamma's view, through years of planning, that that mandate is not going to slide. And so we're at a critical time in this question about how to go live equipping the fleet. The technology from the FAA standpoint is deployed. The ADS-B equipment has been invented by manufacturers, costing years and millions. It's practical to install. It works. And so now we simply have to get the equipment into every aircraft that flies in the United States. And that's the big part of the challenge. And the longer we wait, the more the work piles up to the end of the mandate period, which makes the whole process very impractical. So it's important that we keep making progress in getting this equipment installed into the fleet. The FAA, of course, is aware that there's thousands of aircraft that need this equipment, and there is some resistance to the cost and the complexity of going through this process. So they formed a working group. Gamma is involved with that group, and so are other industry stakeholders. And frankly, we don't see any showstoppers. We think this can get done, and we think we can have a much safer general aviation fleet when the equipment's on board and flying. So do a lot of operators. 9,000 of them have already said, me first, and put that equipment in their airplane. And they see tangible benefits. And over time, we think the costs are not only attractive today, but will get more attractive in time. So that was me wearing my Gamma hat on policy. We are strongly for ADS-B and meeting the mandate. But I would like to put my pilot hat on for a minute. And I'm a regular weekly pilot. I belong to EAA. I belong to AOPA. I'm a happy member of Gamma. I really like being a pilot. And I just want to tell you, I think there are enormous benefits in the ADS-B solution. And I look forward to having them in my cockpit. First, there's expanded ATC coverage. I'll drill down to these in a minute. There's free weather. There's excellent traffic, see and avoid capability. And then there's live flight information like NOTAMs and TFRs. So let's drill into these. This is a star on the sectional that represents Piqua, Ohio, my home airport. The black area is no coverage from ATC. They can't see me. They can't see anybody. With ADS-B, that black area goes away. Now, personally, this matters to me because I can't tell you how many times I've come into my home airport after a long flight on an instrument approach, but I'm going to break out maybe below 1,000 feet. And right as I'm going over to advisory, they say, traffic 12 o'clock, type and altitude unknown. And this is the one time in the flight I've gotten truly nervous because I'm almost done and I don't know what's in front of me. So I really like the idea of expanded coverage in my area. But this is just one part of the U.S. geography. East of the Rockies, when ADS-B is deployed, above 1,500 feet, ATC will be able to see anybody flying. Anybody. This is enormously powerful. But better than that, the aircraft-to-aircraft see and avoid capability will be working all the time. So I think this is fantastic from an ATC standpoint. I think it's great from an aircraft-to-aircraft standpoint. Now, free weather. I don't know how a lot of pilots feel about it, but I pay for weather service on board my airplane. I think it's one of the greatest safety enhancements in the cockpit. I won't go anywhere without it. I know a lot of pilots that bought portables just so they could have weather. Well, this is a deliverable with ADS-B if you option the in aspects of the system, and it's on board all the time. Tremendous benefit. And there's a payback because it's free, so you don't have to pay for what you're paying for now. Sorry, XM. ADS-B traffic. I don't subscribe to the big sky theory of piloting. I subscribe to the small sky theory, which means it's always too damn small, excuse my French, when I hear a traffic call out. And it's not going to get any better. UAVs are coming into the marketplace. We're going to have to figure out how to have more aircraft operating in the same space. And we've had scares, and we've had fatalities that ADS-B traffic would clearly help avoid. Now, what's interesting is pilots can cut into ADS-B at more than one level. They can cut in as a meet the mandate only operator. They can be seen and others can see them. They don't need the in benefits. They don't have to take them. But those of us who option for all of it can make everybody safer through see and avoid. This is a big deal. I think we can all think of accidents in the recent past here that would have been clearly avoidable if pilots could have seen other aircraft operations. And then there's flight information. I think we've had press-worthy events of people being unaware of NOTAMs in their flight ops and have paid a price for it. And we've had events where people have violated TFRs because they were unaware of them. Well, with ADS-B, those important pieces of information are live and available to the pilot anytime they're flying. So I guess I would say that We have some years to get this done. We're at an important time for ADS-B installation. I think there are enormous advantages for fleet-wide safety, enormous advantages for pilot benefit, and for me, price is relative. Everybody can say that something's more affordable for one person than for another person, but I just put 4 tires on my 15-year-old truck with 150,000 miles on it. It cost me $1,000 because I need to have good tires on my truck. I think of ADS-B as a whole lot better value than that for me as a pilot. I'm going to turn it back to Pete.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe mentioned, we're looking forward to a reauthorization year. And as folks that know how to work Washington, and I say this collectively of all my friends here in the front row, we all said, what's the best way we can go in this reauthorization year to tell the story about this fantastic industry? And we all got together, everybody ponied up some money, and we said, let's refresh our economic data. So if you look at the last time that we did this study, it was in the 2004-2005 timeframe. And at that time, we arrived at a set of numbers. We've used that very successfully on the Hill. We've used that to generate a general aviation caucus, which is one of the largest caucuses in both chambers. This was one of the things that helped stimulate that. And so all of us collectively said, it is smart to go into this reauthorization year and refresh those numbers. So let's think back to when we actually did the last survey in 2004, 2005. The industry as a whole was ascending. It was before the Great Recession. And then what happened? 2008, 2009, 2010, those were some pretty dark years. We lost some employment. And the question was, as now we're here in 2015 and we look at data, and the most recent data, that a complete set of economic data we can get is 2013, we looked at it and said, okay, now we're on the backside of that recession and the industry's starting to come back. That's probably a pretty good apples to apples comparison of where we were in the last economic study. And here's the neat thing. If you look at that 9-year differential in time and you take a look at our economic contribution, it is now $219 billion, up from about up from $150 billion. That is significant. And ladies and gentlemen, that's just to show directly what incredible jobs our industry not only employs directly, but how that money and how the impact of services that are provided to our industry, how great a jobs those are. This is an industry we're stimulating by our government here in the U.S. and by any government around the planet. The Chinese would pay very, very well to be able to look at this economic contribution and say general aviation will improve the Chinese economy as it would any economy. 1.1 million jobs generated by our industry. It's tremendous numbers. And what we've been able to do is we employed PricewaterhouseCoopers to do this study. One of the neat things about that, other than obviously a tremendous reputation by that company, but our colleagues over in Europe also employed PricewaterhouseCoopers to be able to do their study of the economic impact there. And as we get better employment data, we will be able to improve that study. But focusing back here on the States, just to take a couple highlights there, if you look at the per capita type of income and you look at the leading states out there, that's pretty amazing. Look at a state like North Dakota, big landmass but few people. Well, what do they use to release that energy out of the Bakken oil fields? They use general aviation. And those are some pretty impressive numbers. If you look there at the top 10 states just for overall employment, those are some pretty healthy numbers in states all around the country. And so there is a logical reason why we have success recruiting members to the general aviation caucuses on the Hill, because these jobs matter. These are high wage paying jobs, high tax contributors that go into the economy. So it's a tremendous thing for all of us to be able to talk about, to highlight, to be able to go up to local grass tops type of work, whether we're talking at the local level, any policymaker that you can talk to, you can use these numbers and talk about the tremendous contribution this industry. But we just didn't want to stop there. What we wanted to do, and you all get a copy of this, and we have representatives from PricewaterhouseCoopers here to be able to go and answer any real technical questions. The methodology is very consistent with the last study that we did. We use a Department of Commerce type of formulation that's very well accepted. But what we did is we also, all of us together, said, let's give some color and context to the numbers, because the numbers don't really tell our story fully about our great workforce, the people, and why are we all in this industry? Because we love the people that are here. There's no industry that I believe that you can run and have such tremendous friendships. And so we wanted to tell stories, whether it's stories about what an airport does for a community, or what manufacturing does in both a large manufacturing operation or a small one, or how our charitable organizations give back to their communities, or how Rotocraft provide the EMS services and unlock the energy resources that we need to be the competitor that we are in the world marketplace. So we've taken and produced a compendium that goes with the study for everyone to use to be able to tell those stories. And that goes along with a lot of the efforts that we have done collectively in our different associations to be able to get information to people within our industry, to be able to tell it to a wide audience about how great this industry is and what a great economic contributor it is. And I want to personally thank all my friends here for supporting us in getting this study done, and I know it's going to be very useful for us up on the Hill as we go into this reauthorization year. The last thing I want to cover is something that I always feel very important. We all feel very passionate about the great groups within general aviation that really give back to our society. And the first one that always is near and dear to our heart is Corporate Angel Network. And if you look at what they did in 2014, that's pretty darn cool when you can fly over 2,500 patients, have an increase over the year before, and then you look at that number of, we're coming up on almost 50,000 patients being flown since the inception of Corporate Angel Network. And I know Peter is with us today. This is a pretty proud accomplishment for Corporate Angel Network. Another one, Veterans Airlift Command. Even though we're starting to get ourselves out of some of the ground combat that's overseas, we still have a great need for the men and women from our armed forces to be able to get the military treatment. I was reading, or I was listening to somebody on an interview show the other day. He had 46 operations that were a result of having an improvised explosive device. So this is an ongoing need. And last year, Veterans Airlift Command flew over 1,700 missions. And when you look at their total, they're coming up on 10,000 missions since their inception, and a nice volunteer aircraft and pilot force of over 2,500. That's really given back, and it's very impressive. Another organization, an all-volunteer organization that we're very proud of, and that actually served as a great host to the GAMA Executive Committee last summer, is the Recreational Aviation Foundation. And the success that they've had is truly at the grassroots level, being able to work with the state legislatures to be able to get these recreational use statutes passed, so that somebody can allow use of their grass strip that they may have on their farm or on their hunting property that's available, and not have to worry about getting sued if something happened. These have been very successful, not only just to expand the ability for us to fly and use land out there, but it also has helped with awareness of just what recreational aviation can do to just make flying fun. And so to do that, it is not only about private land, it's also about public land. And the RAF has had a lot of success being able to work a memorandum of understanding with the Bureau of Land Management, who has a lot of land in the United States. And also, which I think is a tremendous accomplishment, is a Forest Service that is pretty tough in some cases to work with if you want to use the forest for things like recreate or land on an airstrip. To have the Forest Service now place aviation very prominently in their planning directives to all of their different forest managers across the country. This is a big deal, and we're very proud of the RAF, and we're very proud of our association with the RAF. And last but certainly not least, the Citation Special Olympics Airlift was something very special here the last summer. Many of our Gamma members flew their aircraft in. I know Mark flew the AOPA aircraft. Ed and I were on the ramp along with the Cessna executives, greeting each and every aircraft. And when you're able to take over 600 athletes and coaches and be able to high-five them as they come off and be able, some of them, the first time ever to fly in an aircraft, and they come off with all smiles, it just warms your heart. And I only wish we could do this more often, except once every 4 years. But it was just a great accomplishment. And so with that, I think we'll end up concluding our formal remarks, and we wanted to leave a good amount of time for any questions out there. So I think, Mary Lynn, you have the mic, and we want to use the mic if possible so that it can get picked up on the webcast, but otherwise shout loudly if you're in the middle. So, questions?
Well, okay, thank you. I think that was great. You've given a great recap of where we've been. Pete and Joe, do you want to take a look at where you think we're going in 2016, 2017, 2018, and by category, rotorcraft, fixed wing, light, mid, and large jets? Can you do that?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll start because I'm not in the predicting business. I'm in the report, and crystal ball is as cloudy as everyone. Industry, our economic indicators have all centered on the fact that if we have 3 consecutive quarters of plus 3% growth, the industry is going to fare well. Well, you look at the U.S. recovery, it hasn't been as strong as we would have all hoped. The fourth quarter numbers weren't as good as what we wanted, but the trajectory is positive. Then you go across the ocean, you go to Europe. There's still a lot of issues to be resolved within the Eurozone and with the general European economy. Deflation, inflation, those aspects. Then you go a little farther east, you go to Russia. Now that's a chocolate mess. I mean, politically, economically, if you look at where we sell a lot of aircraft and you look at the impact of reduced oil revenue to that economy and the sanctions and all of the political problems there, we don't know how that'll sort itself out. Now continue, go to east, go into China. And we're encouraged. We just had a Chinese delegation here with the Aircraft Cooperation Council. We had them here in town last week. They're saying all the right things about how much they want to open up. I know, absolutely, I can say without any reservation that the Chinese are committed to being able to develop general aviation in China. But you have this thing out there called the People's Liberation Army that controls the airspace, and we all know that without airspace and without infrastructure, how do you grow it? Now the Chinese have, they can go and put a factory on the ground, and they can pour concrete with better than probably anybody else. But will we have the airspace to be able to fly there? I think if you look on the Piston end, they've got to be able to train pilots. If you look on the rotorcraft end, there is a very much intention. If you look at their new buildings, they have heliports on them, so I'm encouraged there. But as you keep going around the planet, you have the pluses and minuses. Noise is a big issue. I know Matt pulls his hair out, and that he and I are both enjoying that right now, of pulling our hair out, just trying to deal with noise regulation, which, I mean, when you look in Europe, it is serious. I mean, you get fined, with their noise sensors there, and so we've got a lot of work to do up at ICAO and here in the States to make sure environmental regulation does not go and be debilitating to this industry. So it's the known unknowns, as was said by the former Secretary of Defense, that are out there that I don't have a good crystal ball. Joe, want to add?
Well, we think about these things a lot. I can say that my guidance would be primarily associated with the propeller-driven market, so pistons and turbines. A couple of thoughts I'll share with you. One, we have yet to see our 5-year forecast materialize on a year-by-year basis. The market actually undershoots what we expected. And that's because looking back over years of history, we think that the build rate for piston aircraft and turbine aircraft is sort of unsustainably low because the fleet is shrinking. And at some point, that shrinkage should prop up OEM production. So I continue to believe that there's more recovery ahead. We just haven't had all the stars align. But some of the key factors that we think facilitate growth have been happening. One is a certain amount of business consolidation. There were a lot of manufacturers chasing a small pie. There are less manufacturers chasing that same pie, which means they have a better chance of being able to invest and innovate and improve the attractiveness of their products and differentiate a new aircraft from an old aircraft. And we're starting to see that. Particularly at Oshkosh last year, I saw a lot of my customers in the piston market really starting to act like they had an order book supporting their marketing and supporting their sales effort. So I think we're beginning to see that, and the numbers show some piston recovery. On the turboprop side, our thesis is that the utility of a turboprop is so good that as global markets grow, turboprop sales will grow, period, whether that's China, India, what have you. And so I'm very bullish on turboprops over time. And there's a lot of investment going into turboprop technology to make aircraft better. And a lot of big companies with a lot of engineering horsepower are investing in turboprop technology. So I'm pretty bullish, but we're about twice as patient as we expected to be.
Pete, is this working? Right. On the reauthorization front, I know that the chairman of the two appropriate committees are all enthused and have been doing a lot of groundwork to get people on board and to move things forward. But the deadline is September 30th. What are you concerned about that could derail things and cause delays in getting a new reauthorization bill for FAA?
Well, Dave, if you look at just the delays in the surface transportation bill, I think we are in a different place in aviation than they are. So I'm glad that I'm not in that industry, because they've got to be pulling their hair out like we were a few years ago with 23 different extensions to our reauthorization. I think we're in a different place than we were back then. As my chairman said earlier, my hat is off to the committees because they have been doing outreach to all of us. So Joe mentioned what they've been doing with manufacturing. I know that there's been outreach at Tarkio last year. Chairman Schuster and some of his colleagues were out there, and we all were in a listening session with them. So I think that you see us in a different place than we were last reauthorization from general aviation versus perhaps the commercial airlines. I think my colleagues could add many of their concerns to this, but we were all happy that we don't have to fight the user fee issue. I think it was very good when that came out without being in the president's budget. But we know that there are some contentious issues between the airports and the airlines that could actually impact the reauthorization. But I would say that there is a very firm commitment, whether you're talking to Chairman Thune or Chairman Schuster, or you're talking down at the subcommittee level, to be able to work these, and there are not the issues in aviation that I would see in the surface transportation. So I'm hopeful, but of course with Congress, anything can happen. But this is not an election year, and that's a good thing for us.
Hi, Pete. Is this working? Okay. My question is not about ADSB.
Oh, come on!
Although if you ask nicely, I can ask that one later. But my question is really about Part 23 cert reform. I've been, as you know, I meet with a lot of Part 23 airframers, and I want something very simple. I want to fly their airplane so I can write about it and take pictures of it. And over, I'm hearing from them that they're having a really hard time scheduling the meetings with the FAA that they need in order to move the certification along. It's especially difficult for them to get the FAA to come to them to do the audits that are necessary. Is Part 23 certification reform, is that going to address this, and is that a reasonable timetable for helping these manufacturers move their products along in a more timely fashion?
You want to start?
You can fire away on that one.
Okay. So I would take, we had the Small Aircraft Revitalization Act that dealt with Part 23. And we are making, I think, some really global initiatives to be able to regulate the certification of Part 23. But I think what your question is more alluding to is the overall certification reform effort that we're going into, and that's what Joe was talking about. So this morning, we have this group that's been meeting with the FAA for 4 years, and we have a mix of large companies, small companies, airframe OEMs, engine, avionics. And we report back to our board and get guidance from the board on the issues to bring up. And it all boils down to cultural change. How do you drive this big bureaucracy to be able to go and do things differently and go to a risk-based approach? For years, they could rely on us collectively going to the Hill and asking for more FAA resources. Those days are over. That's not going to happen. And in fact, I think the FAA budget is going to be continually be squeezed. So what does Administrator Huerta have to do? He has to think of better ways to do business. And what does he got to do? He's got to look to business on how they do it. And so we are 100% behind his efforts to look at the risk-based approach. And when you apply a risk-based approach to rulemaking and to oversight, what do? You go and you look at a manufacturer, and if a manufacturer's been building props for the Wright, they build props for the Wright brothers, been doing it for 100 years, you don't just go down in every single program with a sharp pencil on that. You say, okay, they've got competencies. They know how they're doing it. Now, if they're doing something totally exotic, something new, okay, there needs to be some oversight there. And when we go and we rely on companies that have built this structure, this ODA structure that Joe talked about, and we allow them to do what they know how to do, and they're going to be safe because they fail. They'll fail as a company if they're not safe. And then we take those resources and allocate it to new entrants that don't have that expertise or that long process. We make it all better. We use their resources more effectively, and we speed our time to market for everyone, whether you've got an ODA or you don't. And that's what they're talking about there. And so Part 23 is just part of a broader certification reform plan, and I think I agree totally with Joe that if the FAA leadership can make happen what they briefed us on this morning and can drive the workforce to look at this in a different way, we will be on the road to success. But that driving this changing course of this big ship, this big bureaucracy, is not an easy task.
I'm a pretty tangible guy because I got to go back and run a business as well, and I need FAA support for my certification work. And I was extremely encouraged by our meeting this morning, more so than I ever have been, because the whole question about making the FAA's capacity more effective to support new programs is to make sure they're working on the right thing at the right time. And the low-hanging fruit is clearly taking full advantage of the delegation system that's deployed but not fully functioning. In this morning's meeting, they had extremely tangible proposals for how to tell whether every ODA company is getting maximum value. How much delegation have you asked for? How much have we given? What's the gap? What do you have to do to get full delegation? How many projects have you submitted? How much retention have we taken? What's the reason? This has not existed before. This is a dry run template for a set of metrics that will make every ODA more effective. Now, to the extent that that ODA is a Part 23 type certifier, they won't be making phone calls for as many appointments. They will be much more self-reliant. So if we follow the course that was outlined today, which has new and meaningful recommendations in it, I think we'll gain more capacity.
Joe touched on UAVs earlier, just in passing, and I'm curious, how does the industry view UAVs, especially once the sense and avoid technology is resolved? Do they become a threat to operators economically? And also, would those manufacturers be eligible to become members of GAMA, and if so, would they be welcome?
Okay, you got enough of them there, Bill. So Mark sent out a questionnaire the other day to AOPM members, which I'm a proud member, and he said, you know, are you concerned about potential of 30,000 unmanned aerial vehicles being in the airspace within the next 5 years? And yes, I am concerned. And I'm not talking about an economic threat to us. I'm talking about a threat of running into them. And, you know, we run birds through our engines. We don't run unmanned aerial vehicles of plastic and metal and cameras and everything else. And so are we concerned? Yes, we are concerned. But that is, and Joe touched on it in his benefits of ADS-B. That's why I'm such a proponent of it, because we're going to have the majority of the UAVs in congested airspace, which would be under the ADS-B veil, the Class C and Class B airspace, all the way down to the ground. And according to everything that the FAA has told us, they're aircraft, and they're going to have to equip just like we're going to have to equip to fly in that airspace. But I can't see them with my eyes. No frickin' way can I see these little birds. But boy, I can see them electronically, and then I can avoid them. So, but I'm very concerned about, and I really worry about Matt's membership in the rotorcraft community, because they're down there amongst them. And we've just seen how many of these machines go astray, get lost, including some of the machines that have been authorized for use in the movie industry out in California that were some of the first ones that were approved out there. So I think as we see the FAA rules mature and come forward, the requirements for training the operator, whether it's full pilot certificates or it is something that trains them to properly use these machines, and then the technology within the machines that they can't go certain places where they can cause trouble. Can we say, you just program something in where it cannot possibly go above 400 feet? We had a very interesting discussion with Patrick Key, the head of EASA, last night at dinner, where he talked about that's one of the ways that they're going to look at regulating those machines in Europe there. That it's a toy, but when it's down below 400 feet and people can operate them. But if it gets above 400 feet, now somebody's got to be competent to be able to operate them. And so I am extremely concerned about the UASs, but I think that technology can help us be able to see them with our technology using our ADS-B in features, but also help them sense and avoid, because it is ADS-B can be used as a poor man's TCAS, for lack of a better analogy, and those machines can be required to do it. I am hopeful that any UASs that they put into the airspace in this new rule that the FAA is going to put out, they require them to equip with ADS-B early, because I would hate to see thousands of these machines out in the airspace and all of a sudden the mandate hits and then they start going, well, we didn't have to have it before and we're not going to pull our machines down. And when you talk about Amazon and some of these other companies, they got a lot of money behind them and they've got a lot of ability to lobby and everything else. And we would very much, if we're going to have to equip, we want those machines to equip. And yes, they're going to be part of general aviation, so at some point in time, if they meet the thresholds and they're certified, they'll be able to apply for membership in GAMA.
Hi, Pete. I'm Linda Shiner with Air and Space Magazine. You showed some statistics about job creations in the aviation industry, and my question has to do with worker shortages in the aviation industry. I've heard anecdotally and read anecdotally that there are jobs that exist for which there are no trained employees, and I wonder if that is a concern to your association, to your industry.
You want to start?
I'm going to be one of those guys that's a contrarian. I don't have that problem, partly because general aviation wage scale supports the best and the brightest in our neighborhoods where we operate our businesses. We tend to be able to get folks that might be lower down in the food chain somehow in the quality of employment that they can offer, and that we get their best employees. Maybe that's not sustainable, but that's what we find. Number two, at least for businesses that do a lot of their value added with machining, which we do, the enormous productivity gains we've made in the last 20 years have caused us to essentially believe that our business model is made up of the smallest cadre of the most skilled people we can have and a lot of automation wrapped around it. And so I would say our machinists over time have moved from guys that move handles and crank knobs to application engineers who are operating manufacturing systems. And I think that's a great winning formula for general aviation, particularly in the United States or in Europe, where they have that level of engineering sophistication, because it means your competitive footprint is on technology, not cheap labor. And that means that I can transmit those investments into job security for our workforce. So personally, we have felt that we have a workforce that supports our growth, and we're investing in technology and manufacturing rather than job skill development.
Now, if we take our operator community, I think that there's some concern out there. I talk to Matt very often. To have skilled mechanics out there that are capable to work on rotorcraft is a concern, but again, those high wages are a good thing. And we always talk about pilots. You know, we're reaching, as we pushed out the retirement age for at the commercial level to 65, now those guys and gals are retiring, and we've got to be able to recapitalize that fleet. And then we've got the world that's expanding in aviation. So I think that there is healthy employment. I think that we will be able to fill it. But I want to end by, since Linda, you are here, I just want to call you guys out on Air and Space Magazine, because they have, those of you that have been paying attention, we're doing a World War II victory flyover down Independence Avenue on May 8th, the 70th anniversary of VE Day, and Air and Space Magazine has been our partners with it, and I'm very proud to say they're dedicating their issue in the April-May issue just to this flyover to honor the men and women both on the home front and that deployed overseas that won that war. And so we're assembling with luck and some good sponsorships that we always can use more. One of everything we can get airborne, every different kind of World War II aircraft, and we were bringing them down in 15 historical formations to signify the air battles, or not air battles, but the battles of World War II, from Pearl Harbor all the way to the final air assault in Japan. So it's going to be exceptional, and the World War II Memorial Foundation is so excited about this, and we've got President Bush 41 is our chairman, along with Bob Dole and John Dingell, the former dean of the House of Representatives, and we got a large slew of representatives and senators that are supporting with this effort. So it's gaining energy, and I hope you get excited about it, because it's going to be fun. What else? Oh, come on. Somebody's got to ask an ADSB question. Robert, you don't want to ask? Anybody else?
I just lost $100.
This is Jim Cooling with an ADSB question. How are we doing with the FAA and the privacy issue with regard to ADSB? That's a big issue for a lot of our clients who want to operate without having the press show up when LeBron James is going to land.
Very true. And Jim has been very vocal on this issue, and Ed and I just had breakfast last week discussing how we're doing it. The good thing is we got our technical minds on it. It is a tough challenge, because at the same time that it gives us this capability that no longer type an altitude unknown, it gives you a lot of information on that aircraft via tail number and everything. What I feel good about is the fact that Paula's folks are chairing the installation committee working on this Equip 2020. We got Jens Henning from the Gamma staff working and sharing the equipage end for the avionics, but we have contributions from all of our associations and all our manufacturers to try to solve it. I can't give you any promise that we can't, because it's technically difficult, but we're sure going to try to put our effort toward doing that. And just to finish off with ADSB, you know, a lot of us have talked about cost, and there's this perception out there, and I guess if you say things enough, to some people it becomes reality. But $5,000 to equip a light general aviation aircraft is just not the right number. There was a very nice product announcement yesterday, and as Joe said, the market is working. The price is coming down. But one of our manufacturers who announced the prices, which gives you compliance, ADSB compliance south of $2,000 to just comply with the mandate, they had an engineering workforce, a very large workforce, developing that product for 3 years. So we've had this debate about portables. We've had this debate. I think that we've got everybody convinced you have to have an antenna installation. It has to be grounded. It has to be permanent to the aircraft. If you do a portable, you've got to say, can I go through a development cycle? Can I meet the specifications? There's no prohibition against this portable, but can I meet the FAA specifications and its reliability standards to be able to always be there transmitting that GPS position, and can I do that with a portable? And as we've got the best avionics manufacturers on the planet, and no one believes that you can do that cost effectively. And so we could continue to have this debate on portables, but I don't think you're going to be able to produce a portable that's at the price point that you can exceed or have it lower than what you could do with installed avionics. Anything you want to add?
No, I'm just looking forward to the benefits.
Okay. All right. We do have a lot of avionics manufacturers here in the room, and for those of you that want to continue the ADS-B discussion, they are going to be available, so please grab them, sit down at their table, because there's no assigned seating, and be able to pump them with questions. And especially on this issue about portables and everything like that, they are the pros. If there are any questions on the economic impact study, we have our expert right here from PricewaterhouseCoopers that'll be able to answer any of the technical questions, and I ask you to take a copy of the reports with you as you go. Thank you very much.